And this answer came to me that we're here to learn how to love. And I thought, love? That's a crazy answer. That is not what I've noticed about human experience. That doesn't seem to be what we're doing here. And the answer continued that we're here to learn how to love, to learn how to give and receive love. Then this tapestry popped out in front of me. The height of it was how many people were on Earth at any given time. So you could see that population go up and down and vary. And I saw that the present we're like at about as one of the maximas. It did seem to get a little higher, but then the population falls to the floor.
This is Beyond with Heather Tesch, where we examine near-death experiences and life itself, hopefully making this life a little better. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today. Today, my guest is James Goettsche. Hello, James.
Hi.
It was so fun to meet you at the IANS conference, and I was blown away by your story. By the way, for people listening, IANS is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and it was their annual conference. And your story was so incredible. The detail and the things that you saw were so unique. And then you also had a really interesting look at the past and then also the future. So why don't you start on the day it happened? I think you're 11 years old. Take us to it and share what happened.
Okay. We were headed out to see some caves out in the desert. And we were several miles out into the desert. And there was some children alongside the road, probably 3 and 5 years old. My cousin was a newly minted driver. He gave him a good berth and got into some loose gravel and lost control of the car. And the car ended up cartwheeling end over end and sideways alongside the road. It was on flat ground. The last thing I remembered was floating up towards the windshield and the top of the car, thinking this isn't going to be good. I was 11 though, so nobody dies. I wasn't thinking that I would die. I just thought this is going to hurt a lot, and because I wasn't wearing my seatbelt. And the next thing I knew, I was looking at the backs of my hands, and my vision got blurry, and then I could see the back of my head, and then I could see my whole body, or I could see the bottom of the car, or I could see my body, whichever depth of field that I focused on. And so I rose up pretty high above the car, and I could see the children that sort of triggered the accident were jumping up and down, clapping. Only they weren't moving. And one of them, her feet were off the ground. And they were like frozen in space, like you see portrayed in movies. And I could actually see the sound distorting the light, like you might see from a barbecue or something that's very hot. And it was distorting the light, the sound coming from their hands. And then I realized that they're such young children, they couldn't be out there by themselves. So I thought, with their parents or somebody must be with them. And so I panned around and I saw a pickup truck. And as soon as I thought of any place, I went to it. And so I was instantly over the truck, and I was observing the mother, and the mother was making sure that she brought what she meant to bring. And I could experience her better than we're able to be aware of our own selves. I knew all her hopes and aspirations and her dreams and her fears and what she was, just who she was entirely. And then I noticed the husband, he just unloaded his motorcycle and he was going back into the tailgate. And mind you, these people, no one's moving, but I'm just moving around the scene. And I checked him out for a moment, and then my awareness got drawn to the horizon. And looking out into the horizon, that's where I went. I went out into space. I don't know how far, but far enough to be away from the earth and the sun. And I found myself observing, I don't know, a couple hundred, what I call them points of perception, which is kind of what I was. I didn't have a sense of a body, but I did have a sense that I was from a particular point in space. And there were about a couple hundred of those, and they were all paying attention to something that was to the left. It looked like it could have been a planet or something, a barren one. 3 or 4 of them were like vaguely aware of me, but they didn't want to engage me. They thought that, I got the impression, I don't know what they thought really. I got the impression though that what they considered they were doing was very important and that I would be upsetting to it. And so I thought, I don't even know why I'm out here. And if they don't want me to come any closer, I don't want to be any closer. It's not my gig. I don't even know why I'm out here. So I turned around to, and the way I could perceive them was that they were distortions against the star field. They were like points, just kind of similar to the sound, but they were points of obviously conscious entities. You could tell they're individuations, but they were distortions against the starlight. There's just way more stars when you get past the atmosphere than we see at night. So when I turned around, I wasn't sure where to go because all I could see was stars again. And there was nothing like this that I could tell, but I seemed to know where to go. And I shot back down to earth. I went back through the atmosphere and back over the accident. And so I was looking down at the car. I looked down at my body in the car. And I noticed that since I came from this other direction, I was looking at a butte. It's about 2 miles away. And my attention went to that butte. And so next thing I know, I was inches away from that butte, and I was looking at some blades of grass that were on it. And I could see that they had a spiritual essence to them, like you would call it a soul, and they had an intention. We wouldn't consider it conscious like we are, but it definitely had an intention, and you could actually see it as like almost a light would be the easiest, best way to describe it. And the ground had it too, but even more primal, less, and I don't know how you would characterize that. Less, it was simpler. It was a simpler form of a similar thing. And I remember thinking that, wow, these things, the grass has a soul or a spirit, but we don't think of it that way. And the grass it was feeding off of the soil. It didn't think of the bacteria in the soil that way. Because I came to learn later that the soil is just laden with bacteria, and that's what feeds plants. It's like a coexistence. And I thought it was ironic, because we don't think animals or anything, plants, at least not how I was raised as an atheist, we're just our bodies, and there's nothing more to any of that genre. So I found that really ironic because the grass was just like we are. And then my thoughts went back to the accident, and I was over my body again. And I was looking down in the car, and then it was as if love is what I was made out of, my whole being. And I understood everything that there could be to know. It seemed like, and there's this absolute sense of serenity. Like there's nothing that could be wrong anywhere in the whole universe. I'm feeling very knowledgeable. I understand things that I never even thought to consider, and it just keeps going into such depth. And then, but the one thing that perplexed me is that if I exist like this, why would I be like that? And looking down at my body. And this answer came to me that we're here to learn how to love. And I thought, love? That's a crazy answer. That is not what I've noticed about human experience. That doesn't seem to be what we're doing here. And the answer continued that we're here to learn how to love, to learn how to give and receive love. And I thought, I still wasn't completely getting it. And then this tapestry popped out in front of me off to the side from the car, actually. And that was every human being that had ever lived on Earth or was projected to in the form of a tapestry. And it went from the past was to the left, which was most of it, and then present was a little to the right, and then the future was extended beyond that. And it was very multicolored, and the height of it was how many people were on Earth at any given time. So you could see that population go up and down and vary. There's so much to it. It's hard to know how to describe it, really. But it started from when we were seated here, basically, is the way to say it. I say it, but our spiritual race, or whatever you want to call it, came to this planet fully in bloom. It was fully populated and with all the plant life and animal life, and observed it for a little bit, because I looked at the very beginning of the tapestry where it was just almost like a single line before the numbers increased to where they are today, which this is the fourth time we've been this populous on Earth according to that record. But we observed a species and then embodied it, and possibly altered it too, because there was something I couldn't make out about that process. But then that started the whole thing of having physical lives, and the earliest people lived for hundreds of years, perhaps, and they were fully aware of who and what we are, and leaving was a conscious decision that they made. But over time, you could see that changed, that people became people instead of that more, I don't know what you'd call it, a higher level of awareness. We started to become enamored with our own physical creations, and it started to pay attention to those. And to me, that's what the veil is, like you might be heard the phrase, the illusion of matter, but it kind of is a literal term, because to me, because that's what we pay attention to. We're very much into that as having a physical experience. But then that's when the cycles began, this being the fourth, and each life was a filament that made up a thread. And so they were all interwoven, and each filament had its own hue. Each one of us has our own hue that we bring, and that it changes over our lifetime, but we are interwoven by affinities. And we have like family affinities, and we have friends affinities, we have our interests, and we all very much influence each other's hue through the interaction. And collectively, each genre or way you could cut it has its own hue. So like your family has a hue, your friend groups have a hue, or your hobbies and interests, your passions, that has a hue to it. And you can see it by community, you could see it by town, you can see it by county or state or nation. And you could also see it by ethnicity and culture. And yeah, and I could see where there was whole cultures that grew and evolved and developed and had no knowledge of each other. And then you could see when their colors would mix, and you could see catastrophes. You could see where the numbers of people would fall back, and you can see the implications of war. And even when a culture was like almost completely vanquished by another one, just annihilated, that color of that culture that had been annihilated would become part of the predominant culture, just from the interaction, from being that close to one another. Yeah, like even the continents had their own hue. Yeah, it was really interesting. And when I saw that the present, we're like at about as one of the maximas, it did seem to get a little higher, but then the population falls to the floor. It did 3 times previous, but then we worked our way back up into the numbers we are now. This time it gets caught. It looked to be managed. It was a flat line. It didn't recover. I can't say how many generations were projected in the future, but I can say that the future is just as material as the past in the Akashic record up to a point, and then it became indeterminate. And the hue that everyone embodied was like a khaki brown. There wasn't the variety of colors that I'd seen in the whole of the Akashic record as it was represented. But I can certainly see how it would be possible to choose our lives, because there's definitely generations that are projected, and it was just as material as the past. The people, I did look at some lives in detail from the past. One life I followed all the way through, because there was about 9 bright white sparkly points on it, the Akashic record, scattered throughout it. And so I checked out one of those and watched a whole person's life from beginning to towards the end. I didn't watch the whole ending. Um, yeah, I didn't watch the whole end, but and so I got curious about the future because it had a different tone, and uh, the numbers don't change, which was odd. And the people there lived very. It's a big departure from what we do today. It was kind of they lived in like a hive mind. Um, People communicated telepathically. They were all on the same page. Um, so it's not quite as eventful. Um, it's not a whole lot. There's no such thing as privacy. There's no private thoughts or anything like that because everyone knows what everyone else is thinking at all times. It's very much like a hive mind uh, experience. The people like prayed their food, their plant life that they grew. They prayed it into existence. Uh, I didn't see it being instantaneous. I saw it being like something they have to do every day. Uh, I hope it's just the people I looked at because the planet was pretty barren, and I don't think they were doing it by choice. I think it was more that that's what it took to sustain life. Um, People's faces were different. Their facial expressions were a lot different. It kind of, I mean, everyone was beaming with love, but they kind of resembled, to me, a hybrid of maybe a Down syndrome with autism. So like non-speaking, non-verbal, but just beaming with love. And their faces actually had that kind of more rounded features like you might see with someone with Down syndrome. And it's odd. Of course, it was all deeply, it's very interesting and all, but then it dawned on me that this information was coming from somewhere. This wasn't my information, and this feelings that I was feeling, that feeling of love and knowledge and serenity was actually coming from behind me. It was just permeating me, my being. And because I thought, well, who's we? Wait a minute. The answer said we. And this is definitely coming from somewhere. So I turned around to see what was behind me. And I saw stars again. I thought I was shooting out into space. And there was this amorphous black uh, thing kind of blocking it out. I used to think it might have been the beginnings of a tunnel, but now I kind of think that it was that being. It was um, like a black light. If you can imagine such a thing, it's hard to reconcile myself now. But and having my beliefs before that was that when you're dead, you cease to exist. So it dawned on me that I was dying, that that's what was happening, and that my consciousness was dissipating like a cloud, and maybe this is how it's the last bits of it. So I got started being concerned, and then simultaneous to that thought of being scared about that was that my original instructions flooded back into me, my original intentions for this life and why I came here. And I thought, no, there's too much I have to do. I haven't done any of it. And that thought put me back in my body in the car. And the car was upside down. I was facing out the back. And it just instinctively reached for the ignition. I reached back and turned the ignition off. My cousin who was driving, he had his seatbelt on. He was struggling with his seatbelt. He was hanging from his seat, and the car was sputtering, and there was brake fluid was dripping on us. I thought it was gas, but it was brake fluid because the car rolled so violently that it broke the hard lines to the brakes. And my passenger window wasn't broken. It was folded in half, but not broken. And I initially was in my body. I turned my head away from the window because I thought it was in the act of being compressed, and so I expected it to shatter because of the way it was bent. And then I reached back because I could feel that and hear the car was still sputtering. And we crawled out of the car, and I couldn't hardly stand up. I was shaking so bad, and my whole body was just buzzing. Um, Eventually, I was following his lead. I was 11, and so he was 14. And neither one of us knew what to do, really. And then I was about to mention that there's that truck over there. We could go get those people, and a white Cadillac showed up, and the guy told us to get in his car. He'd take us to where we needed to go, and it was a white Cadillac that had white leather seats, and the people that were driving it were wearing white clothes. And the whole time that they were old, they were very elderly, had white hair, silver hair, and the whole time he was driving us up to where our parents were, to where our fathers were, he was just berating us about how driving so recklessly. And that isn't what happened. But someone had been fishtailing on that road prior to us driving over it. So there was tire marks from somebody fishtailing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for, I don't know, 500 feet. Somebody did it for a long time. And so he saw those tracks and was just berating us for being so reckless, but that isn't what had happened. So he didn't really know. And then his wife was, while he was berating us, his wife was turned around apologizing, telling us not to worry too much about what he was saying. And it was kind of almost comical. And he did. He took us to our parents and then our fathers. And then they went back to the accident. They took us to the hospital, and I had a broken sternum and a knot on the top of my head, the size of an egg. And he had actually torn his liver from the seatbelt, had torn his liver. So they kept him longer. But I was just treated and released. I made the mistake of mentioning it to the doctor, some of what I saw. I didn't tell him about the Akashic record. I just told him about being out of my body and some of that stuff. But he told me that it wasn't real, that I should dismiss it, and actually kind of just tried to laugh it off. Say your brain does weird things sometimes. But that everything that I experienced while I was out of body all transpired in the time it took my cousin to yell my name once. So it was really hard to reconcile later, especially knowing where I was in the car, in relation to the car, and then knowing where the car was in relation to the road, when the last thing my conscious memory was floating up out of my seat, headed for the dashboard. So I wanted to believe him, actually, but I couldn't. And so that kind of set me on a long road of denial and a form of PTSD, actually. I sensed from him he was doing the best thing he thought he should do. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't like I was challenging his beliefs. He was just trying to be reassuring.
All right, this seems like a good place to stop, and we'll carry on in part 2. I always ask you to comment, and if I'm commenting on this one right now, it's just wow, wow, and wow. I mean, all of the things that Jim talked about, and there is so much more that we dig into in part 2. So here's a look at some of the things that we cover.
That's why I was so confused. Like, if I exist like this, why would I be in a body? Shoot, I mean, this is nice. You know, we're down here looking for love, and love was what I was made of. It's like I didn't have to look. I didn't have to, and it wasn't because of who I was or who I could be or who I wasn't. It just was, and yeah, you couldn't do anything to change it. It was a giant tapestry, and then you could pan and zoom into it, and when you zoomed into it, you actually see people living their lives. It's a living record. All of it is as life was happening in those times and in the future, which is another thing that's just mind-boggling, really, because how can it all exist simultaneously?
I really appreciate those of you that do watch part 2. To me, it's when we cover some of the most interesting things, because that's when I ask questions and we really just go a little bit deeper, and sometimes a lot deeper, into the things that my guest has talked about. I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the things that Jim shared, the tapestry, the 9 points of light, the population going up and down, the future, all of that. There is so much to consider. So please share your thoughts. I so appreciate that. It really makes a difference to this channel when you comment. And then also, if you can give it a like, I really appreciate that. And subscribe. All of those things are really helpful to me. And just most of all, I'm so grateful for all of you that watch my channel. It does mean a lot to me. By the way, while you're waiting for part 2, or if you're just looking for other episodes to watch, remember, there's always more in my playlist. All of the episodes that I've ever shot are in that link to my playlist, and you can always find that in the description. Thank you so much, everybody. There is so much more coming up in part 2, and I really hope that you'll join me. Thanks for joining me on Beyond with Heather Tesch. Please add comments and questions you'd like future guests to answer. Also, if you liked what you heard, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe. That'll help keep this podcast going. You can also go to Beyond with Heather Tesch to look for more episodes.